Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hope and Healing Chats, where we discuss everything dealing with sex addiction and partner betrayal trauma. Our goal in these conversations is to assist you on your healing journey while helping to restore hope. My name is Monifa Ellis-Addie. I am a CSAT and a betrayed partner specialist. I work in Banyan Therapy Group in Los Angeles, where I assist individuals and couples dealing with sex addiction and intimate partner betrayal issues. Today's topic, with Valentine's Day coming up, we will be diving into love addiction. But first, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. We have a very important guest today. She is a renowned trauma psychotherapist and the visionary CEO of Life Counseling Solutions. Driven by her unwavering passion to empower individuals in overcoming life's challenges, she stands as a leading mental health expert celebrated in her transformative Women Redeemed program, where she assists women with breaking the chains of toxic relationships. Her work has earned her global recognition through television appearances and prestigious awards, including the 2023 International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals Inaugural Leadership Award. She inspires healing and redemption and shares her expertise through the Let's Talk About It with Janie Lacy podcast, TEDx Talk, and as the expert therapist on TLC's hit show, 90 Day Last Resort. Welcoming Dr. Janie Lacy. Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, when I was in grad school studying to be a therapist, I was in the addictions course, and you know that assignment everyone gets. You have to go to a support group around addictions, and I wanted to do something around sex, so I found a sex and love addicts addictions anonymous group. And at the time, I knew this much about sex addiction because of the media and stuff, but I knew absolutely nothing about love addiction. And I went on Valentine's Day, and the room was packed with people. And I learned very quickly that Valentine's Day can be a triggering day for love addicts. So before we get into why that is, could you, if there's people out there wondering what love addiction, like I was clueless in grad school, can you educate us on what is love addiction?
Absolutely. First, love addiction is not in the DSM, right? So it's not a recognized disorder, but we know without a doubt that it exists. So when we look at it, we're looking at someone's behavioral pattern. And especially when it comes to romantic love, that can lead to unhealthy relationships that we'll see a lot of emotional dependency, but there's usually obsessiveness and some type of compulsion around romantic love would be its basic sense. And it can manifest a lot of times as like chronic craving for that romantic attachment, regardless of whether the relationship is healthy or not. So, but the most important thing is that what I said is a behavioral pattern, because sometimes some people can hear this definition like, oh, well, that was me like 5 years ago in such and such relationship. If
Yeah.
it's a one-time thing, there's sometimes problems in relationships that you leave that relationship. But this is when you're looking at your history, there's a clearly a behavioral pattern that we can see.
So we'd see it in every relationship along the way, not just like that one individual person that we were crazy about.
Absolutely. That's definitely would be a pattern in your relationships.
Do you see this more amongst women or men, or the same?
Yeah, so when it comes to love addiction, it affects both men and women. We know this, right? But when we look at our research, we can clearly see that it suggests that women have a higher suffering, I would say, from love addiction. And we think about these things, and it's influenced by many things, right? So one, whenever I look at data, how many people are actually going to a therapeutic intervention because of some type of behavioral pattern that we would call love addiction. It's more women that will come
Hmm.
to therapy, right? So there could be some reporting biases there. But we also think about social conditioning, whether it's the movies, whether it's all the things of how we're represented on television for romantic love. These are our imprints, especially as little girls or people. So more than likely this is our role model for what we think it should look like. And then so I think of it in terms of those cultural factors that's going to even affect our emotional expression, right? It's kind of accepted for us to want the flowers or want these types of things
Hmm.
from a societal expectation, where men, it looks a little bit different.
And I think a good addition to that is kind of we look at how they remake the Disney movies now.
Mhm.
Like when they remake them, it's like they recognize like, oh, this is what we were kind of promoting at the time. Like Aladdin, the whole story's now changed. Now it's about her being the sultan. It's not so much about the romantic story. So
Mhm.
there's definitely something to that, like, as children, we're socialized to want that fairy tale romantic love.
Absolutely. I remember watching the Cinderella, with the shoe,
Mm.
and then now she's there with the prince, right? So I remembered in my own childhood some of the things that I was exposed to.
Yeah. Do you think that, especially with things shifting like Disney movies, that that'll look the same in the future since societally things are starting to shift?
I think things are starting to shift as far as when we look at more traditional roles for women and men, right? And then you have more millennials and younger who are actually writing now for Hollywood and for the ones that are producing the company or producing these movies. So I think through the writers and through the different generations and through the different cultural expectations, I think we're naturally going to see a shift in the roles of men and women. But I do think when we look at um, brand story or the hero's journey, there's certain types of
Mhm.
stories, there's certain types of themes and stories that we know from a Hollywood perspective that sell. So having a hero, having maybe the damsel
Mhm.
in distress, I do think we're going to still see those types of themes, but how they present to us will probably be different than they had traditionally speaking.
Mhm. Yeah. Does love addiction present differently in women versus men?
In our Women Redeemed program and versus men that come in, we do see a couple things that I would say highlight the differences when it comes to women and men. Like, for example, us as women, we can typically be more overt with our emotional dependency, and it's almost accepted from a societal standpoint, right? Women are always emotional, right? We hear these terms all
Mm.
the time, but we tend to still, and I do believe it still happens, we still tend to prioritize relationships over our personal needs, right? Because mothers with children
Mhm.
or we're a nurturer, so those things can get distorted, especially when someone has a pattern of dysfunctional love relationships. But then I also see for us as women, there's a higher likelihood of seeking validation through relationships, and we will tend to historically sacrifice our own personal boundaries for relationships. Well,
Mm.
men, not so much. So when we look at
Mm.
men, when it comes to love addiction, there's more focus on physical aspects of the relationship. And
Mm.
I'm making very general statements here, right? Because all
Yeah.
men are different. But generally speaking, men tend to express their love addiction through the pursuit and the conquest, right? Of pursuing her. And there's more of a likelihood of them of a lower likelihood, I should say, of men acknowledging any type of emotional dependency, because most of the time we see from our men love addicts that there's a pattern of them avoiding the vulnerability while they're seeking control of the relationship.
That's interesting because, and I guess you could say, sex addiction and love addiction kind of they overlap at times.
They're in bed together
So,
for sure.
what would be the differences? Like, how do we know if it's sex addiction, love addiction, or a combination of both?
Yeah. So, the first thing I always say is that we want to make sure that someone has a true professional assessment, right? Because people
Mhm.
can read this and or listen to us, and then they can kind of diagnose themselves. So the first thing is I would say, so always, if you do feel like you're listening to us and you need to, and you're wondering if this applies to you, then I would always suggest going ahead and getting a work with somebody that truly has skilled in love addiction and sex addiction, and also has trauma and also is trauma
Mm.
focused, right? So when we look at some of the distinctions from sex addiction and love addiction, if I break it down as most simplest, is we're looking at love addiction as there's a primary focus on like the emotional connection, and there's this craving of the romantic attention and romantic attention and validation, especially in relationships. And then what we see is the core that happens is there's this fear of abandonment that drives the behavior. So we'll see a lot of compulsivity and almost like losing their dignity in the relationship because of this fear of abandonment. And with the love addiction, we'll also see the withdrawal symptoms are primarily emotional, which is the most difficult for a lot of women and men to go through recovery because of that withdrawal. So
Mm.
there's a high relapse rate. But where we're looking at sex addiction, there's going to be this primary focus on the sexual experience, if we want to just make it as simple as possible for the sake of the
Mhm.
conversation. So someone who is more sex addicted or has sex compulsivity, they're going to be craving that physical gratification. Where for the love addict, there's more of the emotional experience. So if we're looking at the differences, and then the sex addict, there's going to be this compulsion around their sexual behavior, their patterns, where we'll look at the behavioral patterns of a love addict. That's going to be more of the emotional experience of it, where the sex addict, there's primarily the sexual behavioral patterns. And when the sex addict is having withdrawal, their symptoms can be both physical and emotional, where the love addict, it's mostly just emotional withdrawal. So if we kind of look at the most basic way to explain the differences, those would be the primary things I would say.
Okay. So then, which brings us to the top of the discussion, Valentine's Day. So why is this day triggering? I mean, we can kind of put it together, but in your professional opinion, why would this day be triggering for love addicts?
Well, let's think about it. I don't know about you, but I'm already going into CVS or wherever stores. There's Valentine's hearts, candies everywhere. The Jared commercials coming on television
Mhm. They
or
skip
or in the
everything
Instagram.
else.
Yeah, it's everything. You know, it's in your feed and social media, so it's everywhere. So, with that being said, I think during this time there's a true intensity around societal pressures around relationships. So if you're not in a
Mm.
relationship and then you see all these commercials, these hearts, it's kind of like a reminder that you're not in a relationship. So I think Valentine's Day is so triggered because it highlights your relationship status, right? And I know on Valentine's Day or after, and I can say, right, because I probably was one of those people at one point where you're posting the flowers, you're posting all the things, right? You're curating a
Yeah.
story to show that, hey, I got the flowers, right? But it creates this unrealistic expectation as well, right? So it magnifies these feelings of whether you're lonely or you feel inadequate or you're not in a relationship, or even if you're in a relationship, most people also Valentine's Day can be triggering because you also have to be fake. If you're in this
Yeah.
toxic relationship and now Valentine's Day is coming and you're looking at these commercials and like, oh, well, I really wish so it's triggering for many different reasons. But those would be the highlights that I would see because it just creates a societal pressure about relationships that it highlights your relationship status and just creates these unrealistic expectations, in general. So it could be very triggering for a love addict because we also know that there's these unrealistic expectations that potentially, if she's not in recovery, she's already operating under, and it magnifies those feelings of loneliness. So, it could be the second wave of the cuffing season.
Yeah. Yeah. So then how can one prepare for Valentine's Day? Because I mean, I feel like that's the gift, like we know it's coming.
Yeah.
So how do they prepare ahead of time?
Yeah, we do know it's coming. So, one of the things I would suggest is to develop a self care plan. So, if there are things that you are already doing to take care of yourself, now is the time to double down on it. But there could be other things, and self care is very different than self love, right? So, self care is just really making sure that, whether it's the manicures or the pedicures, or if it's just also caring for yourself, or maybe it's just needing to rest. But you have to set realistic expectations, right? So, perhaps that the commercials and all these things are going to come, or as I mentioned on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you are on social, the pictures are going to come. So a realistic expectation is knowing they're going to come. So maybe not being
Mhm.
on social media that day, right? And so you can create alternative celebrations. I know a lot of girlfriends will get together, well, they call it
Mhm.
Galentine's,
Yep.
right? So you can get together and have some alternative celebrations and these types of things, but maintain healthy boundaries. If you don't want to see it in your face, perhaps maybe taking a break around a couple days before and on Valentine's Day, whether it's social media, maybe not watching the love sappy movies, maybe the time to watch some action flicks. But practice mindfulness and grounding techniques is what I would always suggest to people if they feel triggered by something they're watching or something that they hear, is to take care of yourself in that way, but also process, maybe journal like what's coming up for you. I feel lonely, or I feel, what, my relationships suck. They don't work out, whatever it may be, just kind of get it out of your head and put it down on paper. So those would be a couple of things I would suggest to be able to prepare for the day.
Now, if someone is in a committed relationship, is it possible to be love addicted to your partner?
Oh, absolutely. So, love addiction is not just for single people. Love addiction is for someone who's been married for 20 years or someone who's been with their boyfriend on and off for 8 years, right? Love addiction manifests in many, many different ways. So, that's why it's so important that we understand what healthy relationships look like, because people could be married right now. They haven't even come to therapy yet, but they don't
Mhm.
understand the highs and lows and all the things that they're experiencing throughout their 20 years or 15 years of their marital relationship.
So then what would healthy recovery look like? Or or healthy, I guess the goal is to get to a healthy relationship. So what
Mhm.
does that look like?
Yeah, so when we think about a healthy relationship, I always recommend that wherever anyone is at, whether they've been in a healthy relationship or not, to understand the hallmarks of what a healthy relationship looks like. So when they're in a relationship or they're going to get in a relationship, they have something to measure it around. But one of
Mm,
the key distinctions that I'll see among my love addicted clients versus those that move into healthy relationships, the healthy relationship, you still maintain your individual identity, because that's going to be key. When you're in a love addicted relationship, you lose that individual identity and you're not even conscious of it, right? So if a healthy relationship, you maintain your individual identity. It's like interdependence. You can be dependent on the relationship, but
mhm.
you're also independent. And a healthy relationship is going to respect boundaries, right? So whereas a love addicted relationship, there's boundary violations all the time, and the harshest one is the boundary violation someone has with themselves, is they don't have boundaries, or they violate someone else's boundaries. But healthy relationships, they have honest communication, where we're thinking about, from a love addiction relationship, it's more manipulation, it's more control patterns that happen versus just having open and honest communication in a healthy relationship. Regardless of the conversation is going to hurt someone, you're going to have those honest conversations and not manipulate the information to make yourself look good. And then
Mm.
some other things that you can probably see in a healthy relationship is more of the shared mutual and trust and respect, right? And the older I get, I say respect is even more important than love, right? So you need to
Yeah.
when we look at the healthy relationship versus the love addicted relationship, there's going to be jealousy, there's possession, there's going to be possession and control, and these types of things that happen. And then the generally speaking, I would just highlight that balance between independence and interdependence from a healthy relationship. Where the love addicted relationship, there's going to be more um emotional dependence. So those would be some key differences. So when someone's moving through therapy, they want to identify their symptoms that they're experiencing from a love addiction standpoint, and then move more towards a healthier relationship. But it's easier said than done.
Well, yeah. No, this we're talking about it in what, 30 seconds. And this,
Right.
I'm sure, is like a whole process, of years to get
Yes,
to, especially when you've been operating default in a certain way for so long. You have to learn a whole new way of moving.
absolutely. So, if
Right.
someone's in a committed relationship, if they're looking at potentially wondering if they're love addicted, one of the things that we'll see is there a constant need for reassurance. Sometimes we also look at that from an anxious attachment standpoint, but if they're
Mhm.
constantly looking for that reassurance and excessively monitoring your partner, you need to know where he's at or where she's doing, or constantly need to see their phone, and there's any type of difficulty with maintaining independence in that love addicted from a committed relationship. And then, as I mentioned, there's the highs and lows. There's going to be emotional volatility. It's hot and cold, come here, go away, stonewalling or love bombing, right? You'll see all these types of things happening in the committed relationship. And from that love addiction in a committed relationship, it's a lot of fear-based decision making as well, because you're constantly monitoring, like, oh, is this going to make her mad or make him mad, or I don't want him to leave me, so I'm going to even violate my own boundaries sexually to make sure that I'm making sure I'm doing everything to keep him, right? Those types of things that we'll see as far as a committed relationship, to answer that question.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
that
I
yes.
imagine that a love addicted person probably finds themselves with people that are love avoidant,
Yes.
because then it's kind of like the chase of it all.
Mhm.
Um, what would a love avoidant person look like? What are those characteristics?
Yeah, so you mentioned it, right? So the love addict and the love avoidant are kind of like magnets to each other. So
Mhm.
you usually, if you're dominant love avoidant, a love addict, then you're probably going to find yourself, whether it's conscious or not conscious, of being attracted to someone who is love avoidant. So some key characteristics that I would suggest for your audience, right, is there's going to be, from the love avoidance side, there's this fear of emotional intimacy. So we'll see that. So they're emotionally unavailable is the term that we kind of hear, right? And then there's usually this pattern of what we call these distancing strategies. So it could be where if you're getting
Mhm.
too close, they're going to push you away, or they're going to do things to keep you at a distance. So they could be a workaholic, they could be a cheater, right? They could be all these other types of things to keep you at a distance, whether you are aware of it or not, because it keeps you chasing, it keeps you seeking them, which kind of also puts them in this power position. Again, it's from a very subconscious standpoint, but they can focus on all these other distractions, and you're kind of just begging for their attention, right? So it kind of keeps you in that wanting position. But the love avoidant will be someone who has difficulty expressing emotions, and sometimes we'll see that the love avoidant is more of from a male's perspective, and that's why people will say that, oh, they'll make excuses for them. Oh, he just wasn't raised that way, or he doesn't know how to express his. They make excuses so when it shows up in their relationship. But a love avoidant will have difficulty expressing their emotions, and they have a history. The love avoidant is more of the person who has a history of leaving the relationships when it gets to when it deepens, I guess would be the term I
Mm.
would say. Mm-hmm.
And I imagine like the begging for and pleading of the love addict kind of feeds that intensity that they're looking for of this relationship is like you always hear people say sometimes, you got to work so hard, like it's so hard. And I'm always like, does it really have to be that hard? I don't know.
No. Yeah, what happens, right? Society, we hear all these messages and we hear all these types of things, or you didn't have a role model of what a healthy relationship looks like. So you say, oh, we hear it all the time. Relationships are hard work. You got to put in the work, right? When you find the healthy match, absolutely not, right? There's going to be challenges, but we know there's a difference between patterns and problems. Relationships can have problems that they can work through because they have the skills, the tools to do so.
Mhm.
Love addicted, the love avoidant will have patterns, right? They're going to reinforce each other's core wounds. That kind of keeps that dynamic going. And then what we'll also see is they'll create familiar emotional patterns, right? Which is why it's important. We don't always want to, it's not about blaming our childhood, but it's about looking back at those patterns that from an emotion, from an attachment theory standpoint, what was created in our childhood, because then we'll create those familiar emotional patterns in our adulthood. So it's like, the basic way to say that without getting too therapeutic is, right, you're going to replay that childhood attachment dynamics. And that's going to maintain that comfort yet dysfunctional roles because you are in that familiar place. So to be in a healthy relationship, for most people that are moving from a love addicted to a healthy relationship, when they're in their wounded self, a healthy relationship seems boring. He's not my type.
Mhm.
We don't have chemistry, right? Because he's not the ups and downs. He's like this. But their healthier self will be a perfect match for that. But their unhealthy self is going to say that they need the chemistry. They need the chase. They don't necessarily recognize that that's what's happening, but that is a familiar pattern.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you just said, not that we're blaming, because I feel like lots of times people jump to that, like, oh, I can't blame everything on parents. Like, we're not blaming, it's just an observation. Like, how did you get here? It's just like taking notes and, you know, yeah, just reviewing things. Um, so if someone is looking for, because you mentioned at the top of the show, like, make sure you get professional help if any of this is sounding familiar to you. How does one look for, because this is a niche, how does someone find help for love addiction?
Yeah, so what I would suggest is first making sure that they can search nearby, but making sure that the person, obviously, I'm a CSAT, so I would say find a CSAT or someone
Mhm.
that understands sex and love addiction, but that also understands trauma, that they have trauma informed training, and that understands attachment theory. So when they're looking for a therapist, they can ask these questions. They can look for maybe on their website or online, do they specialize in love addiction? And then if they do a consultation, they can ask about their trauma informed training. Do you understand, or how do you work with attachment theory? And, I always suggest if someone's seeking help, not only having an individual therapist, but also getting into group, looking into some type of group options. I believe it's a very effective way to move through this.
Which I guess leads to Women Redeemed, because I want you to talk a little bit about that program and what that looks like.
Yeah, so Women Redeemed, we have multiple programs for women who have a history of love addiction or toxic relationships. So we have a retreat once a year where we stay in a house together, and we take the 12-week program and we do it in a weekend. So we have a 12-week program, we have a weekend, and then we have an online membership. Most people get an online membership after they've completed the other. But the 12-week program is made for a woman to go through detox, because we're looking at a
Mhm.
90-day period. 90-day period, we know without a doubt, research shows that withdrawal, and there's some hallmarks in that, the 21-day period, the 60-day period, and the 90-day period. The brain has now have new synapses of the brain. So we do the program so that she has the support through that 90-day period. But we're looking at the 3 pillars of healing through the program. We're looking at her mindset and changing her mindset. We're looking at the inner child, the inner work, and then the body work, because the body keeps the score. Trauma is held in our body. So EMDR, breath work, bilateral stimulation type movements. So we're systematically moving them through the 90 days to get them a good start on their recovery program. And then we take a condensed version of that and we do a weekend retreat. But the most important thing that I find in doing these programs is the women coming around other women who are going through the same journey and getting that support that she needs, because they all feel, every single one of them will say they feel like, I'm the only one that's going through this. And there's so many women, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if there wasn't a need for more education and more treatments for women to understand that they're not alone, but there is treatment and they can get to the other side.
Is there any online diagnostic? I don't like calling them diagnostics because it's more to get information, right? But it's on any free like online tools that someone could use or go to kind of hunker down before they start to look for a therapist.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different research. There's the Love Addicts Anonymous. It's the SLAA, which that probably is the top of my mind, the freest research where you can go and do an assessment on there. You have
Mhm.
Codependence Anonymous is a great book. It's a great support group, and it's probably behind me somewhere. But Facing Love Addiction by Pia Melody is a great book to read. Another book in the genre would be Attached by Amar Levine. I like that one. There's online resources looking that are focusing on love addiction. So there's a lot of the internet is a great opportunity to start, but to make sure, and anything that you do on the internet, to make sure that you're looking at professionally vetted people and that have some type of specialty in this area to start off the recovery focus.
Okay. Well, how do the people reach you? How do we know where we're going?
Sure, sure. So the best way to find me is janielacy.com, JANIELACY.com, and it has all the connections to my socials and all the other things.
Yeah, I'm like you're listing all these resources. You didn't list yourself. I'm like, you're a resource.
Yes, Janie Lacy or womanredeemed.com.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your knowledge with us. It's greatly appreciated.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
And if you want to look up Dr. Janie Lacy's info or the info for the show, it'll be in the description below. And as usual, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And as always, remember to embrace your healing journey. Every step forward brings a new hope for tomorrow. See you next time.